And so think about the effect of that on your brain when it's constantly pumping out a superficial amount of dopamine and forming these neural pathways, establishing them to the point where you can't experience joy or peace or pleasure from anything else in your life. It's so crippling.
Welcome to the It Matters podcast. I'm your host, Walter Perez, and let's dive in as we help you grow your mindset and elevate your leadership. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the It Matters podcast. I'm so grateful that you're joining me in another episode. This podcast is all about leadership, personal growth, mindset. We want to help you. We want to equip you to be a better leader. And so I'm glad you're joining me in another episode because today I have a very special guest and I have a conversation with Matt Cline from Restored Ministries. And I got to tell you, it's a very unique conversation. And we talk about pornography addiction, sexual health, and just the effects on the body, the effects on relationships. You know, I learned a lot from him because as leaders, we need to realize that there's things that we're dealing with. There might be trauma, there might be pain. And even if personally we're not dealing with it, we will know people, we will have people in our organizations that are being affected by it. So it's important to know how to resource them and help them out. And so in today's episode, we go deep into how pornography addiction compares to other addictions and how it affects our brain, how it affects our bodies. We talk about how it affects our relationships and just even how to handle these past issues or trauma or pains and how we can move and break through them and be able to heal from them. And of course, Matt comes from a Christian perspective, a faith perspective. So we also talk about the spirituality aspect of it. And we talk about the God factor and how it could improve our faith. It can make us be able to step into our purpose and really unpack what we were created for and how we can live a more fulfilled life. And so I really hope you enjoy this episode. I want to encourage you to comment on it, to share it. You'll probably know somebody out there that would find value in hearing this episode. And let us know, like it, and just give us an opportunity to impact more people. And so without further ado, I want to get into our conversation. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Matt Cline. It's a good one. Well, welcome back to the It Matters podcast, Matt Cline. I am so thankful that you are on this episode today. This has been a long time coming. I've been wanting to have you on for a little while, but this is the right time. And I just want to tell you, man, I appreciate you very much. You've become a really good friend. I love your family, everything that you're about. And in my opinion, I think you're a world-class leader, and I love what you're working on, what you're doing. And so I just wanted to say thank you for being generous with your time today, and I'm excited about this chat.
Well, it matters to me to be here. So I've been waiting for it, and I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, the only thing I could have done is asked you to come on a little sooner, but hey, I know that we're both excited to talk about this topic because it's important. And, like on this podcast, we talk a lot about leadership and personal growth stuff. But I think what we're going to talk about today does apply and it contributes to all that. And so you are with Restored Ministries, and I would love it if you could just share a little bit of what the organization's all about, because there's many on this podcast that won't know. And so, yeah, tell me a bit more.
Yeah, well, it started helping get people out of pornography addiction. That was the start of it, but it's kind of expanded into looking at all forms of sexual brokenness and seeing how people can be restored to wholeness in their life. And we're a Christian organization, so wholeness in Christ is a focus, but there's also people that don't have that faith that we've helped. And so, yeah, everybody's got a sex drive. It's not just for people hooked on porn. Everybody's got sex drive. Sexuality is a massive driver in our world, of course, and in our bodies and in our souls. And so how could we teach to have power over our sex drive so that we can have the healthiest sex life possible, whether we're married or single, which is mind blowing for some people who aren't married. Like, I can have a healthy sexuality as a single person, not having sex? Yeah, you can. But it's a different way of thinking, and really, really important, not just for sex, but for everything in life.
So I'm kind of wondering, because when you start talking about sexuality, you talk about pornography. Some people out there might feel a little bit kind of funny, awkward, because this is probably not a common topic out there. And so I'm kind of wondering, how did you even get into this? Because, like, did you have this on your dream board? Did your parents know that one day this was going to be the profession, if we can call it, that you wanted to pursue, or what?
Yeah, no, I was 6 years old, and my teacher in grade 1 asked me what I wanted to do for a living. And when I grew up, and people are talking about like hockey player, firefighter. I just said I want to talk about pornography from stages. That's what I wanted to do. So, no, not quite, not quite. I struggled with pornography, and then I was probably 19 or 20, and thought I want to start something to help people with porn. And I thought it was going to be like AA. Turns out it's not really like that at all. But that was just my thought. And so I was just about 26, and I felt like God's presence, for lack of a better way of putting it. I had never experienced anything like it, but there was a presence in my room, and I just heard the words, want to know what you want to start in the future? I want you to start that now. And so I started working on it, and meeting with people and learning how I could do this, and learning a lot about the topic, of course, and how to help people in the best way. And it's just grown and progressed since then.
Wow. You know what I found very interesting, Matt, is that so once upon a time I did some inner city work. I helped, homeless people in need, people with drug addictions, alcohol addictions. And one thing I learned very quickly is that type of addiction shows physically, like there's something that you can spot. But when it comes to sexual addiction, pornography, and all that, I'm wondering if you agree with me, is more of a hidden addiction. Like it can be, people can be addicted to it for years and not even, you wouldn't even know. And so it's a little bit tougher. And maybe there's this perception out there that it doesn't affect other people, so I'll be fine. Would you agree with that, or?
Yeah, for sure. And the thing about sex in general, even apart from porn, for listeners who are like, porn's not a part of my life. Do you have a sex drive? Everybody's got a sex drive. I'm always like when I'm speaking, I'm like, anybody in here not have a sex drive? If you raise your hand, we'll pray for you, man. Like, it's important because everybody has a sex drive. And so the difference between a sexual addiction and addiction to drugs and alcohol, we don't have this natural craving for drugs as human beings, or a natural craving to be drunk. We have a natural craving to escape into something when there's pain. That's a natural craving. And so what do we escape to? There's something that we escape to, whether it's food for some, or shopping for others, or drugs for some, alcohol for others, or whatever it might be. And that might be pornography. And it is pornography for a large majority of the world, that in our natural desire to escape pain, we choose these vices. But the difference between drugs and alcohol and then pornography is that pornography it's a perversion of a natural desire that we have, in that we all are sexual beings. And so I've had numerous people say to me, like, Matt, I kicked booze, I kicked drugs, I just did a cold turkey. Porn, I can't beat it. Porn, masturbation, sexual activity, like, I can't stop. And I think that the driving force behind it is stronger, because it's a natural desire that's in us, that God put in us for a powerful reason. And he's not going to take it from us, because we're sexual beings. And then the perversion of it can destroy our lives. And I think there's a spiritual reason for that, because there's a real connection between us living out our purpose and healthy relationships and our confidence and all that. And all of those things are connected to our sexuality and what we do with that.
One of my favorite quotes that you say often is, you were created on purpose for a purpose. And I think that what you're advocating for, or what you're on mission and on purpose for, is that this perverts our purpose. This ends up derailing us from our purpose and whatever the God-given potential that we have, right? And so I love that you're really addressing that, because if we pause for a moment and really think, we will realize that it does affect us.
Well, so let's go to the Bible for a moment. One of the first command that God gave Adam and Eve was, be fruitful and multiply. And so be fruitful and multiply was, you could say, their purpose to their life. Well, they go through the story and they end up being kicked out of the garden because of sin. And in Genesis 4:1, it's the very first thing that happens in a broken world. So now they're out of paradise. They're probably feeling a little bit sad, a lot sad. And like, oh my gosh, we had this purpose. We had dominion over all the animals. We were naming the animals. We had authority. We had rule. We lost that because we sinned. And the first thing after they were suffering the consequences of their sin, now they're outside of paradise. It says Adam knew his wife Eve. Adam made love to his wife Eve. She gave birth to Cain, and she says, with the help of the Lord, I've conceived a son. And so their call was what? Their purpose was be fruitful and multiply. When now they're in this world that we are all in, outside of the paradise of perfection, now it's this broken world. The first thing that they did was have sex, and that led to them fulfilling and starting their purpose. Be fruitful and multiply. And so that's it. There's such a power there in the intimacy that is found in sex, in us living out our purpose. Now let's go economically speaking. There's a book called Sex and Culture by J.D. Unwin, and it studies, I think it's 60, maybe 80 cultures, societies over 5,000 years. And there's not one society that when they were in the book's terms or words, when they became more liberal related to monogamy. So in other words, there were more sexual outlets that people were engaging in. Not one economy prospered economically. Every single economy, society crashed economically. Now think about what's going on in our world.
Yeah.
There's so many sexual outlets, so much perversion, and economically we're crashing. So if that's the case on a societal level, wouldn't that be the case on an individual level as well? And because a society doesn't prosper, doesn't crash when individuals are prospering. It's the same principle. And so some people might say like, no, I've had sexual sin my whole life and I'm rich, I'm doing well. And maybe there's exceptions, but I would say you're probably not relationally rich and you're probably not feeling good about yourself, and you might have capability to have more joy in your life, but you keep going to this thing that's crushing your soul in sexual perversion because it's not what you were made for. So the fulfillment of our purpose, economics, what God has for us, the relationships that we have, all of it is tied to our sexuality.
That's very fascinating because you're right. There's a ripple effect out of that, right? Now let's maybe back up for 1 second. Maybe there's somebody listening and going, "Okay, Matt, I hear you. You started quoting the Bible. You're talking about God, and I'm not really jiving with you in that area." This still applies to everybody, whether you have a faith or whether you're kind of exploring that right now, because you found that there's a lot of implications when it comes to our health, our mind. Can you kind of speak to that a little bit? Because I think some people need to realize, putting spirituality aside for one moment, there is still a lot of factors at play here that could be affecting you.
Yeah, like that book, Sex and Culture, is not a religious book at all. The author, I don't even think is a follower of God at all. And he's just looking at the facts of what has happened when there's more sexual outlets that we engage in, and it's not good. And so spiritually speaking, the reason why I think God says things is because it's not just for spiritual, it's for our whole being. So spirituality aside, there are other consequences when we don't live in the way that we're intended to, the way that we're designed. So when we're engaging in various sexual outlets, the chemical makeup for sex in our body is still activated. And so there's all these bonding chemicals that are released in our body through sex, and in particular at orgasm, but even just through the pleasure of sex apart from orgasm. And so these bonding chemicals are so powerful, which is why it's so powerful in marriage to have a good sex life, because it binds you together. And so when you have multiple partners or multiple outlets, or going to massage parlors or different people or pornography and different things outside of, I believe, your marriage relationship, those chemicals are still in place. Those chemical reactions are still in place. And so now you're connected to all of these different outlets, and you're less uniquely connected to one. Right. So now you have less capability of being intimate on a soul level, not just sexual level, but on a soulish level of being intimate with one person. And you don't feel good about yourself. Nobody feels good about themselves on a deep level when they're promiscuous. There's a guy, and I won't name him, but a lot of people know him. He's a famous dude, and he's famous. He became famous. He was a very, very wealthy guy, but he became famous because of all of his escapades and putting YouTube videos of like being on yachts with 30 women and bragging about having sex 9 times a day and these things. And so there's lots of reels and, Facebook things about him. But now he's going like, this is so empty. This is so empty. He's like, this is not what I thought it was going to be. My whole life as a kid, I was told that I wasn't going to be anything. Now I've like accomplished so much, and I found that it doesn't fulfill. And that's what so many people experience. And so we want to look at not just what does the world say is going to be good, or not just instant pleasure, but what is the pleasure, or what is the activity of our life going to produce for us? And so often people that are engaging in sexual outlets, we're only looking at the activity, or we're looking at the thing, the maybe the pain or the stress of our life that we're escaping. Maybe we think, oh, I deserve, because of everything I've gone through, I deserve to, go have this sexual experience. But very few people in that scenario are looking beyond that, at the impact of their soul or the impact of their relationships. And I mean, there are numerous stories of people suffering from depression, and they're going to therapists and going to counselors, and then they quit porn, and they're like, depression went away. Because all of a sudden the neural pathways in their brain are starting to be rewired. And when you're watching pornography in particular, there's other sexual outlets that still applies to, but in particular with pornography, the dopamine release in our brain, it's crippling. And so the way that it works is dopamine is supposed to make us feel good, and it works with our memory too. And so when something happens and it's an exciting memory, and we feel good about it, say we win a championship, or say we have a good accomplishment at work or whatever, there's a dopamine release. When we have a sexual experience, there's a heightened dopamine release, even more than those other accomplishments that I named. And so but the dopamine release that happens with pornography is heightened to a degree that is so superficial that it creates these neural pathways in our brain that tells us we can only experience joy, happiness, pleasure from this sexual outlet.
Right.
So when we have sexual perversion in our life, what happens in our brain is it tells us, and the neural pathways are established in saying we can only have joy from this. We can only have pleasure from this activity, which is why it's such a hard thing to beat. It's such a hard thing to overcome when our brain is literally fighting against what we are trying to do if we're trying to quit the behavior. And so many people have experienced just so much more joy when they quit sexual sin, and so much richness of relationship and peace and even purpose, right? Like for me, I'll speak to that. I used to say, like, nobody's impacted by my life. I'm insignificant. I don't matter. I quit porn. All of a sudden, it's like within 2 months, I had like 20 new friends. I was starting to, write stuff, put content out there. I had purpose in my life. It was crazy, the difference. And so, yeah, there's a real reason why sexuality is so important for us, and sexual perversion is so important to overcome, apart from simply the spiritual reason.
That's wild. Can you remind me here? I believe I've heard you shared like the stat of like when you compare the high that you get out of sexual release with cocaine, like there is they're very similar. But can you explain that, because you have a real good way of explaining that?
Yeah, so I got this from Dr. Ted Fensky in Edmonton, and I used to co-host the Pure Victory podcast. So I think it's episodes 44, 45, something like that. There's 2 episodes with Dr. Ted. But on there, he talks about the dopamine effect with porn versus cocaine and drugs in general. But essentially, the cocaine the dopamine release with cocaine spikes so high and makes it so addictive. But then after, say, 20 minutes, it crashes. And so you need another hit. porn, it doesn't make the dopamine spike go as high. It makes it high, like it's still superficially high, but not as high as cocaine, but it can last for hours. And that's why even like a week or two ago, a guy was like, man, I could watch porn for 6-8 hours. I'm like, man, me too. I remember the sun coming up. I was watching porn all night long, and it just lasts for hours. And so think about the effect of that on your brain when it's constantly pumping out a superficial amount of dopamine and forming these neural pathways, establishing them to the point where you can't experience joy or peace or pleasure from anything else in your life. It's so crippling.
That's wild, hey? And this is, I love that you went there, because it's like people are not realizing the impact of this. And you think, well, at least I'm not doing whatever, and not realizing that the effects are pretty much the same, or in some scenarios even worse. So you've used the word relationships a number of times in this conversation already. And, I've often said on this podcast, we talk about leadership, right? Mindset, personal growth, that leadership starts in the home. And I really believe that, because how we lead ourselves, how we lead our families are super and ultra important on how we're going to lead others. And one thing that I have come to learn is that this 100% affects your family unit. It affects you, of course. And if it's affecting your confidence, your health, it's going to affect how you, if you're married, right? Your marriage, your children. And I think you've, in the years that you've been doing this work, you've had a lot of experience working with men that have come to you and said, hey, like, my family has been ruined, affected, potentially destroyed. Can you speak to that a bit?
It's devastating. It's devastating. There's constantly new people coming and saying, like, my family is destroyed and I think I'm going to get divorced because of 5-10 sexual experiences that they had outside their marriage. And there's so much power in a healthy sex life. And so likewise, there's so much power for the negative in the perversion of it. And it destroys families. Think about it. Genesis 4:1, sex was pivotal in the purpose of that family coming to be. And the purpose was that there was a family, they had a child, and the perversion of it is so damaging. So let's just speak not even to adultery or a family unit being destroyed through divorce or family separation, but just from the internal effects of it. Like I remember engaging in that and not being able to even like operate or smile for a day or two because of the shame or how heavy you feel, or you're up all night doing it, so you're exhausted. It's not just the activity, it's the after effects of it. And there's, I would say most people I talk to refer to it being like, a couple of days of recovery, just from the shame of it or the guilt of it or just feeling down. And it's like, man, you could spend how long, like 10, 20 minutes actually engaging in the act, but then 48 hours in shame. And you're not lively with your spouse. You're not lively with your children. There's stories of kids growing up and realizing that, like, man, my dad didn't play with me because he was in the office in this fantasy world of porn, and he didn't play with me for that reason. I thought he was working, but then I find out he's doing this. And the rejection and the abandonment that they feel is real. And it's not something that the addict is even intending to do, but they're addicted. And so their brain doesn't work right. And when we're in that state, we don't see the consequences. And I've experienced it myself, but a guy recently said to me, like, how could I not see the consequences of this? I just didn't see it at all. And once you're out, you can see it. But once you're in it, it's terrifying because you really don't understand the consequences on your kids, on your spouse. And so it's so important to get out and go through really the brutal journey that's often brutal of dealing with this in your marriage, dealing with this in your family, and making sure you do everything you can to get it out. Christian or not, you'll feel better when you're not going to porn, hooking up with different people, massage parlors, when there's not masturbation. You just simply feel better as a person. You feel more in control. You feel like your urges don't own you. Your body doesn't control you. You just feel like, I get to run my life how I want to run my life. And that's a pretty awesome feeling.
I'm reminded as you're talking about, a saying that I've heard out there where it says, hey, what they don't know doesn't hurt them. And I want to really encourage people to not buy into that lie, because it does hurt them. And it comes across in other ways, in the way we lean into relationships, the way we parent, as you just alluded to, the way we, approach our wives or our husbands, if you're a female. Like, it does affect, even if we're not realizing, hey, and the cost is high when we don't pay attention to this.
Somebody just told me that they're in a relationship with a non-Christian person, so don't believe in God, or at least don't follow him. And it came out that when the live-in boyfriend would go down to the basement at night, the girlfriend wanted to be with him, but instead he would go down to the basement. So this happened for years. And he just told her what he was doing in the basement. And she's like, well, I don't like that. That's cheating. I don't like that at all. I knew you were doing something weird, and I never liked when you would go down there, but I didn't know what it was. And so even when she didn't know what it was, she still didn't like it because she wanted to be with him. So what she doesn't know won't hurt her. Like, no, it was already hurting her. And man, that's happened so many times. Some women will say, like, wives always know. And wives don't always know, but often wives are like, there was something wrong. And it just simply affects us. So what they don't know won't hurt them is a lie that addicts can believe because we don't know the effects of it. But here's the thing is, what are we not doing? Because when we're engaging in this behavior, we're not loving people. We're not loving our spouse or our kids like we could. We're not free to. We're tied up in our soul. And in our mind, we're twisted, and we're not loving in the way that we could love, so that we could have a prosperous family, prosperous relationship. So it's not just what are you doing to hurt them, it's what are you not doing that would be loving and making people feel valuable. And both are very, very relevant with sexual perversion.
Oh man, I love that. What we're not doing really does matter. We both have kids, and I just think about it like, if I'm not intentional about teaching my children how to grow up and how to look at these, how to protect them from some of this perversion, somebody else is going to do it and potentially do it in the wrong way. I mean, how many times have you and I have heard of men saying, well, pornography was my sex teacher. My parents didn't teach me that, or, I didn't have the proper talk or the guidance. And we go learn it the hard way, and we pick up the bad habits and the negative, right? And so uh, I'm very mindful of that, and I've learned a lot from you about how well you talk to your children about it. And it's like, man, you got to be on purpose and make sure that you're doing something about it, so then that they can grow up equipped, right?
You have to. It's everywhere. And as parents, that's our job. We have to talk about everything. So many of us are ill-equipped for life because our parents didn't teach us about sex or finances or how to change oil or whatever, like change tires, like do laundry. Like, we're ill-equipped because our parents didn't teach us. So we could repeat that, or we could go, what is a thing in our child's life that they're going to experience? They're going to be an adult for more of their life than they're going to be a child. So we could play with them their whole childhood and make it fun. That's awesome. But we can also equip them to be an adult for 3/4 of their life, which they're going to be. And so if sex is so central to who we are and to our society, and it's a common conversation out there, why can't it be a common conversation and a consistent conversation in our house?
Right.
If people talk about it without shame in the world, through media, comedy, songs, whatever, why can't we talk about it without shame in our home? And if we don't, like you say, they're going to learn it from somewhere, and they're actually going to learn that it's okay, because the world talks about the perversion without shame and encourages it. And so we need to equip our children and equip our families, and see the value in it, for not just the moment and getting through sin, but just on the positive side. Like, this is such a joyful thing. This is an experience that's awesome in marriage, and not just focused on the sin and the negative. But a dad just told me that before his daughter married her fiance, he was in their bedroom of the home that they were going to move into with his future son-in-law, screwing the headboard to the wall because he's like, hey, this is going to be fun for you guys. I don't want it like rocking, putting holes in the wall. Let's screw it. And the father-in-law was doing that with his future son-in-law. He's just like, this is awesome. You're going to do this with my daughter. Why not? It should be celebrated because it's awesome.
Well, that's so funny. It's
Awesome.
and when you take the shame and guilt out of it and you do it in the proper parameters, I guess if we can use that word, it changes how we look at it, how we talk about it, how we celebrate it, as you're saying, right?
100%. 100%. I remember this. Okay, so there's this young couple. They're in their 20s, extremely successful, extremely influential. They've won awards in different businesses. They've done very, very well in their 20s. They have, I think, 5, 6 kids now, and they've reached thousands and thousands of people with their content and their courses and stuff like this. When they were engaged, the daughter, or the wife, sorry, went to her mom and said, Mom, I'm about to have sex. Can you teach me everything? So they talked about intercourse, they talked about foreplay, they talked about oral sex both ways, they talked about fondling, they talked about everything. And how cool that the mom was willing to pour into her daughter like that. And then the daughter and her husband come together, and not only do they have a good sex life, it has led to prosperity in their marriage, where they're teaching other people how to parent their kids. They're teaching other people about homeschooling. They're teaching other people just simply about leadership. They're teaching other people, and they're doing so well economically because they were set up by their parents to have a healthy view of sexuality and a healthy sex life. It's pretty cool. What we could do for our kids when we celebrate what sex is pretty amazing.
Wow. Yeah, 100%. And it just, you are setting them up for success, right? You're setting them up to win in life in a world where perversion is so high. And you think about, as you were talking, I'm thinking about, you hear about sex trafficking, you hear about how much the porn companies are making. There's a lot of brokenness out there, and if we can contribute it, we can stop contributing to it on this end by helping our children and by ourselves getting in line and getting ourselves figured out, so we can we can stop being part of the brokenness that is out there.
Yeah, and we can. Yeah, exactly. So there's so many opportunities to proactively make a difference with sex trafficking and advocacy organizations. And there's tons of opportunities to do that. But also, just let's not feed into it anymore. I used to believe the lie. No, I've never put any money, like to this day, I've never put any money into porn or anything like that. And lots of people have. But I there would be a sense of pride, or like, oh, I'm not that bad. I was like, get out of here, Matt. Like, every click that you had on a porn site fed them money and fed them revenue through ads. And it just, there's so much out there that we might think, oh, what I'm doing is not that bad. And really, it all feeds into, whether it's sex trafficking or porn, they're connected, and the lives of the porn stars are so awful and sad. One ex porn star, top of the game, 7 years in the industry, which is like almost unheard of, and top 10, porn stars in the world from Maxim and different things. She said, everybody in porn has a sad story. She goes, I was a curious person when I was in porn. I would ask people, why are you here? She's like, people would talk about being molested by an uncle at 8 years old, or their parents were beat over the head with a Bible, saying that they were going to hell if they were going to be sexually active. And they're just like, okay, well, whatever. I'll just go to porn then. And she's like, everybody's on drugs. So many people suicidal. They don't show that on the screen. They don't show it on the screen at all. They make it seem like they're amazing. Like the experience is amazing. But then we don't see them leaving and doing drugs or trying to kill themselves. And then they do drugs and spend all their money, and they have to go back the next day. And oh man, it's so sad. So one guy said to me, but that can't be everybody in porn. And I would say it probably isn't everybody. But if somebody is there willingly, imagine that. Like, what has happened in their life that they're there willingly thinking this is their best life. And as consumers, we're feeding into that and encouraging them and telling them by indirectly that it's okay. So yeah, we don't want to feed into this, and we can't buy into the lie that we're not. and that what we're doing is not that bad. No, it's all part of the whole beast in the machine of perversion, and it's really crippling in our world.
Wow. So it gets me thinking, Matt, like, there's obviously something that we're all working through, right? There's some sort of brokenness, and you really hit on some important parts here where potentially there's trauma, even prior to, if you're the one that's consuming it or you're the one producing it, like we have trauma, brokenness, there's pain, there's something behind the thing. And I believe that we need to stop and really pause and go deeper. And I think you've done some amazing work in encouraging, specifically men, because you've done a lot of work with men, on going a little deeper. Okay, like what's the rooted issue here? What has caused you to feel that you had a void and you needed to fill it with this? And so you encourage men, but can you expand a bit on that and why that's so important to really to be vulnerable in that way?
Yeah, so it's important to understand how this all works. There are a lot of people who focus on the trauma or the roots. I think you said the word roots to the behavior in their healing process. And so I'm trying to quit this sexual sin, and so I need to heal from my trauma in order to quit. That's wrong. That's not right at all.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are stuck in that mindset because they go through a recovery process and they're working with a counselor on their trauma, which is good. But then they're thinking, but if, the reason I'm doing what I do is because I have father wounds and I have rejection, or I was sexually abused, which is horrible as a kid. And so because of that pain, I'm acting out. I'm not healed from that pain, so I'm still acting out. No, that's not what we want to do. Mm-hmm. We want to live as overcomers, even when there is pain in our life. We can change the way that we think and view things and stop adding to the pain by going to perversion. We don't want to continually justify wrecking our lives because we have pain in our life. So we can learn what it takes to stop today, and there are ways to do that. I'm evidence of that, and many people are evidence of that. So this is to speak more to my story just quickly. I was justifying sin because of pain in my life, and then in a day I stopped. Was I healed from the pain? No, it actually got worse, to be honest with you. But I stopped the sin. I stopped the behavior because it wasn't good for me. It was causing destruction. And I got this new way of viewing it that I was like, well, I'm not doing it. And I haven't. Am I healed from all of my trauma? No. Actually, what happens is that when we quit the sin, there's something that happens in our brain that releases truth, that brings memories to mind, that helps us to see trauma properly. It's very fascinating. So when we are going through this process of looking at the roots, we can't justify the behavior because the roots aren't healed. However, the behavior does point to the roots. And so the cool thing is you can look back and go, okay, all of my fantasies were about, my young adult years. Why is that? Instead of just trying to quit everything and don't think about these thoughts anymore, you can go, why did I constantly think about my young adult years? And it could be that you felt like you were missing out in your young adult years. It might be that you felt like everybody was experiencing things that you weren't. Or maybe you're older and you're thinking like, man, I thought life would be awesome now. And it's not. When I was 20, I thought life would be awesome when I was 40 and rich and had an amazing life. And those things haven't happened. Maybe I can now fantasize about what I could have experienced when I was 20. And you can heal from those disappointments and the wounds that have occurred in the life that the behavior points to. And so you're not justifying your behavior because you're not healed, but you can use the behavior to look at what is it in your heart or your mind that can be healed and renewed. And I hope that makes sense. It's actually a really powerful way to view it.
100%. What you just said really gives us hope. Because I was going to ask you, is there hope in all of this? Because somebody out there might think, well, I don't know how to stop this. I've done it all my life. I got exposed to it as a teenager, as a child, right? We know there's stats out there that children are being exposed to it as early as 6 years old. So it's very real. But I love what you're doing with Restored Ministries because you're giving guys hope. You're showing them that actually there is healing available, and there is a way that you could get into community, that you can work through these things and find freedom on the other side.
You can, and there's hope. And there are just the worst of the worst stories that we've dealt with where these guys get out of the perversion and out of the bondage. And not only the perversion in the behavior, but the bondage in their soul. And they start looking at everything that was underneath their sin that they covered up for so long and didn't heal from. And they start weeping and going through this process of emotional healing and forgiving people who did things to them. And there's hope, not just for a good sex life, but for freedom in our mind, freedom in our soul, for having joy in relationships is beautiful. So there's certainly hope. And one principle from God is that what is meant for evil, meant to tear us down, he will turn for good. And he can do that. And so we don't want to look at this perversion, the bondage that we've experienced, the trauma, the sexual trauma, and just simply have a negative lens. We want to get to the point where we see the redemption in there, and we see what good has been produced in our life when we've looked at this, when we've looked at like what we've learned through it, or how we could relate to others, or how it's actually led to a more healthy heart, or more self-awareness, or more humility, or whatever it might be. There's actually a lot of good that can come when we take a deep dive and dismantle the perverse behavior, quit it, and then go on a journey of change and transformation. It can be pretty powerful.
Yeah, and from a faith perspective, and I just love how you've encouraged men and people in general, everybody, that we don't need to find our identity in what we've done, right? In that brokenness, in that filth. But when we pursue a relationship with the Lord, with God, you find your identity in who he says you are. And that can change everything when it comes to this healing journey. Agree?
Well, and I even for spouses, right? I remember one of my favorite things I ever heard was a wife. I said, how did you come to terms with who your husband was after you found out what he had done? And she said, what he did was not who he was. He was the man I married when I married him. And this was just something he did, but that's not who he was. And I'm like, what a picture of the gospel there and God's view. It was one of my favorite things I ever heard. And that's what God says. This is not what you've done. I know who you are. Sorry, this is what you've done, but it's not who you are. And he has this separation from our identity and our behavior that is so beautiful. And we like to attach those and go, the behavior means this is who I am. And God separates that and says, no, who you are is who I say you are, not what you've done. And that's why I just believe there's no love like God's, and there's no way to live that's as full of joy and peace as when you know God and his love for you. It's life-changing and important to understand.
I love it. I love it. We're running a little bit out of time today, and this has been a really good conversation. You and I could talk for hours when it comes to this. So there's one thing I do like to ask all my guests, though. You're on the It Matters podcast, and your organization, man, it's impacting. I mean, you're going, all over the world. There's people that are connecting with you, and their lives are being changed. And you get to be the director, the leader, the founder of this organization. But I'm wondering, in this moment, in the season that you're in, what matters to you? And you talked about a lot of things today that I know matter to you, but is there something in particular in your life right now that matters to you?
It's a good question. What matters to me, there's a few things. But what I'm really looking at in my own life is me more than ever, and looking at why do I react to things even emotionally the way that I do? Or how could I get to a point in my mind where no matter what anybody does to me or I perceive them doing to me, I'm in peace and I'm good and I don't feel offended or disrespected or unloved or alone or these kinds of things. And so instead of looking at situations for my peace, I'm looking at how could I internally, and for me, that's with Jesus, have peace in my mind and peace in my heart. And there's a lot in the Bible that I look at where praise and thanksgiving is so powerful. And for you people who read the Bible, Colossians 3:15-17, it really is big for me and has been for about a year. It's like, if I want peace to reign in my heart, which is what it says, then there are things that I can do. And those verses point to that, and praise is a big part of it. So I'm looking at that for me. That's probably, I would say, the best way I can answer that question, because I think about that often. How could I get to a place of being so healthy and content and peaceful that no matter what happens, I'm not shaken and I'm good?
So good. Thanks for sharing that. So one thing I do know coming out of this conversation is we're going to have you back. And I think you and I can have a deeper conversation or expand this conversation. But in the meantime, if there's somebody that's listening and they want to connect with you, they want to support the ministry, they want to know more about you, where can they find you?
RestoredMinistries.ca, everything's there. And if you want to do a sexual health assessment, you can do that. You can go to RestoredMinistries.ca/quiz, and take about 5 minutes, and it'll reveal some things, and it's pretty cool. So I do this at events, and different people have gone through it and gone, oh, there's stuff in my life I didn't realize. And it just is an opportunity to be aware and to pursue even greater health and freedom. So RestoredMinistries.ca is the website, and then /quiz is the sexual health assessment.
Awesome. Well, I hope everybody who is curious, who wants to know more, and even if you're unsure, to go to there, that's where they can get information to reach out to you as well if they want to talk to you or they have questions. So I encourage everybody to do that and not be afraid. There's just a lot of confidentiality in that. There's no exposing. Nobody's going to know, but it's just really cool that there's help out there. There's hope out there. And I think you've done a great job in really laying that out today. And I appreciate you very much. Thanks for joining me in this conversation.
Thanks, Walter. Great job. Love it. I love the podcast and what you're doing.
I appreciate you very much. Well, for everybody out there, if you have any questions, please direct them to us. Like this episode, share it. I know there's probably somebody in your life that needs to hear what Matt just shared with us. And please share it. It would mean the world to us if you did that. And this has to do about leadership. We talked about it, and we know that if you can improve your life and be better as a leader, as we love to say around here, it's a win-win when the leader leads well. And so we will leave it at that for now. We'll catch you in the next episode. Thanks for joining us.